Greetings and welcome everyone to the Art and Science of Awareness, our monthly interview series in which we speak with researchers working on the cutting edge of mindfulness science. I'm John Roberts from Living Well Community, your home for interactive virtual wellness classes and on-demand programming created and curated for you by Harvard Pilgrim Healthcare and Tufts Health Plan. I'm delighted to be joined this afternoon by Tara Healy, the founder and director of Mind the Moment, the mindfulness program of Harvard Pilgrim and Tufts Health Plan, and our very special guest, Susan Bauer-Wu. Now, Susan is a clinician, researcher, mindfulness teacher, and author with over 4 decades of experience in healthcare and contemplative science. Her extensive work with individuals facing death and serious illness has informed her approach to living well, and the writing of her 2011 book, Leaves Falling Gently, Living Fully with Serious and Life-Limiting Illness Through Mindfulness, Compassion, and Connectedness, a revised version of which will be released next month. Susan has served as president of the Mind and Life Institute, as well as director of the Phyllis F. Cantor Center at Dana-Farber Cancer Institute. Her clinical research has included studying the effects of meditation, as well as how personal meaning in life correlates to immune function and well-being. Susan's most recent book is A Future We Can Love: How to Reverse the Climate Crisis Through the Power of Our Hearts and Minds. Welcome to you, Susan.
Thank you, John. Great to be here.
Now, folks, we want to have you as a part of this conversation as well. So please open up the chat. Let us know your thoughts and questions as they arise throughout today's program. But in the meantime, Tara, I will invite you to take us away.
All right. Thank you so much, John. And I'm really excited to have this conversation with you, Susan. I have been so looking forward to it. And I sort of think of myself as a super fan, having watched your career. But so I want to start with kind of, I guess, your origin story, for lack of a better word, and what sparked your interest in clinical care, but specifically oncology, and then the psychological and spiritual aspects of serious illness.
Yeah. Thank you, Tara. I'm really happy to be here with you. I'm a super fan of yours, so it's great to be together. Well, I started out as a nurse in clinical. That was my clinical home, and my mother was a nurse. My mother was a nurse named Florence, and she was incredible. She worked as a psychiatric nurse and ran a community mental health program, and was a wonderful role model for me. She loved nursing. I could see her interact with her patients when I would go to the clinic, and it was beautiful love that they shared, and it just seemed super fulfilling. And I knew I wanted to go into a caring profession, and thought that nursing had a holistic perspective that really resonated with me, and my mom loved it, so I decided to do it. So then the question is, why oncology? Well, when I was 17, I was in college, already a nursing major, and my mother was diagnosed with an advanced form of cancer. And she died when I was 23. And that just really reinforced to me the whole cancer experience. It's a whole person experience. It's a family experience. This was the 80s. It was the early 80s when I graduated from nursing school, and my mom was living with it. And at that time, there wasn't a lot of attention on the psychological and the spiritual side of cancer. And I was just struck by recognizing how hard it was as a family member, what it was like, and then what it was also like, for my mother. Cancer, it's an existential threat, and there's so much that goes into living with uncertainty and fear, and all of it, the whole thing. So it was like, whoa. And I wanted to make a difference. So that really was the beginning of my work, and started support groups and a variety of a whole program of research as it related to psychospiritual well-being.
Mhm. Because you saw that that aspect was not as prevalent in the care that your mom was getting, the kind
Yeah,
of spirit, like it just was
it wasn't
missing,
present.
or yeah,
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 it
it
wasn't
wasn't,
only present, but I just recognized it was really important.
yeah. I love that your mom's name was Florence.
Me too.
How, how apropos, how perfect. And that you watched her with interest and she inspired you. And did she know how interested you were in pursuing this from an early age?
No, no, and I
Yeah.
honestly, I actually thought I'd be a veterinarian. So there's another story,
Oh, oh,
and I
okay,
thought
yeah.
nursing was actually I didn't want to go to school so long.
Yeah,
So that's why I
yeah,
didn't choose medicine or veterinary. It was that, but I also like the holistic side of nursing. But
right.
little did I know that after a master's degree, PhD, and postdoc, that I actually would be going to school longer than had I gone the veterinary
I was
medicine
just
route.
going to say, you didn't want school to be too long.
Yeah,
But then, I mean, clearly called to a path and just followed it.
exactly.
And a path of caring,
Mhm.
including the sentient beings, animals as well.
Yeah.
Um, so I want to move to just talking about a little bit about mindfulness
Mm.
and what did you learn about how mindfulness in particular can support us and with serious illness? And John mentioned the book Leaves Falling Gently about living with serious illness
Mhm.
and end of life. And I read that book, Susan, and loved it. And I'm excited that it will be reissued. But
Mhm.
tell us a little bit about kind of how mindfulness, this practice of being aware, can support us in managing serious illness, our own or others.
Well, with serious illness, there's the psychological side with a lot of psychological symptoms, right? So we have anxiety and worry and fear. And there's also physical symptoms. And so first I'll just talk about the psychological side of it. When we have a serious illness like cancer, but it really can be any serious illness, oftentimes we're looking back at the past and thinking about regrets, things we had done that maybe contributed to it, or things we haven't done and we won't have a chance to do. So there's those kinds of regrets. We're looking at the future, oftentimes worrying what's going to happen to me, what's going to happen to my family, am I going to die, etc. Am I going,
Mhm.
what treatments are going to happen next, and how are they going to make me feel? That goes on and on and on. And then we know, as you know well, that mindfulness is about bringing awareness to this present moment experience. And when we can do that, we are not so pulled in the past and the future, but we can be present to what we have right now.
Mhm.
And when we can do that, when you have a serious illness, you can work wisely with symptoms that you might be experiencing. You can find what you can do, focus on that instead of what you can't do. You can look at what you have agency of, and also begin to appreciate some of the simple things. And I found that when I was doing research, did several years of research in a major NIH study on mindfulness meditation for cancer patients. Started it when I was at Dana-Farber Cancer Institute. It's an NIH R01. And we did it with people who were in the hospital, and they were in the hospital for about 3 weeks and were very, very sick. And for those that practiced it and were able to learn these practices, we were able to see how it decreased their anxiety and improve their sense of well-being and how they were able to, how they felt and the pain that they experienced. So now I'll just mention now mindfulness and
Yeah,
dealing with physical symptoms. And
yeah.
you also know this, though, that say a physical symptom like pain, but it really can be other physical symptoms that we can experience in our bodies, but pain and discomfort is the most common.
Mhm.
There's the physical aspect of it, and then there's the stories that we lay on top of it.
Mhm.
And the stories actually aggravate it, really can aggravate it because it can increase. So say you have a pain, and the pain is what it is. But
Mhm.
then you start to think, oh no, that pain means the cancer or this illness is getting worse. And if it's getting worse, then what's going to happen? And then you start spiraling and spiraling. And then when our minds do that, what happens with our bodies is that we have more muscle tension. It interferes with our sleep. It interferes with our ability to eat and to digest. And then what happens? The pain actually starts feeling worse. And
Mhm.
so mindfulness is a practice that can actually help us to catch when we are caught in the narratives,
Mhm.
in the spiral of suffering. And we can begin to say, okay, stop. What's happening? Let me
Mhm.
just notice, ah, it's not the same moment by moment. It actually changes. That's actually a really big realization for people because the thought that this is never going to change and it's always going to be there and it's going to be so bad is just suffocating. It's scary.
Mhm. Yeah.
But the moment there becomes this loosening, it's like, ah, okay, it is changing. It does change moment to moment. Oh, and it's made up of a little tingling. It's made up of warmth. It's not this one big hard knot, but there's nuance to it. And then
Mhm.
when people can begin to realize that, they change their relationship to unpleasant symptoms.
Yeah, no, I love because really with the psychological and the physical, it's the same, right? So when we're lost in the past or the future, we're disconnected from what's actually happening. And that, when we can connect in and see mindfulness, I mean, from what you're saying, it's like a relational quality. We're seeing how am I relating to and engaging with it, and then seeing its nature is it's not static.
Right.
And it's such good news, right? I mean, it's such good news because I think that, from what you're saying too, that you can get caught in a spiral of it's always going to be this way. And yet, when you sort of drop the narrative and just you're relating to the physical or emotional experience, that's just what it is.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Thank you for that. So I want to continue moving along your career
Hmm.
trajectory here. And you have had an incredible career of service. And most recently, you were the president of the Mind and Life Institute, and that was an organization co-founded by the Dalai Lama to foster dialogue and to really bridge science and contemplative practice and see, for lack of a better word, how we can have a saner world, a
Hmm.
more peaceful world. And I'm curious how you want, if we think about your early career in nursing, and now you're the president of the Mind and Life Institute for the past 8 years, or you were for about 8 years.
Hmm.
Um, so talk a little bit, like weave that career path for us, and what would you say in that role, which it's such an amazing organization, but in that role, what did you learn? What were some of the key learnings, and what can we learn about um, just improving the world, improving our capacity for understanding the nature of our mind, and how that can create dialogue and enhance our world?
Okay, that's a really big,
This is the
multifaceted
meaty question.
question,
Yes,
and you want me
this
to
is
go from
it.
being a nurse to where I am now. So
Yeah,
I'll be fast.
we have time. We have
Yeah,
time.
we
So
don't have
yeah.
that much time. So, and I apologize for being a little bit hoarse. My voice isn't always so raspy. Um, so my clinical practice, when I worked as a nurse in caring for people with cancer, one thing that I, as a 20-something-year-old, began to observe is that people that both quality of life and quantity of life seem to be impacted by more than just the treatment.
Mhm.
So in the 80s, healthcare was quite different than it is today. So I had the opportunity to really get to know patients and family, particularly when I worked in an outpatient setting for many years. Followed them really for months and years. And I noticed that people who had similar diagnoses and treatment and pathology fared quite differently. And as someone who had an opportunity to get to know them and their families, it seemed to me that how they were living their lives and what was meaningful to them made a difference.
Mhm.
And that sparked my interest in, quote unquote, the mind body connection, which really was not being talked about very much at that time. Very,
No.
very, very, very little. I remember with my physician colleagues at the time, we would, go in the back room and like we talk about it, like, yeah, like something's going on here. Like people would beat the odds
Like
that we could,
separate from the treatment, just the treatment alone. Yeah. Okay.
yeah, people would beat the odds, like how this is like amazing that they're beating that. And then there are other people who basically did not do nearly as well as we would have expected. So anyway, it got me interested in that, and that was why I pursued my PhD. And it was just in the beginning, the early 90s, there was a new interdisciplinary field that is now a full-blown field called psychoneuroimmunology. And I was really fortunate. And when I started out, I got an NIH training grant, part of
Mhm.
an institutional training grant in Chicago at Rush University in psychoneuroimmunology. And that, at that moment, I moved to Chicago. I was grieving my mother's death. Now I'm
Mhm.
on my personal side because they come together. Grieving my mom's death, coming out of a very difficult marriage in my 20s. I was broke and I moved to Chicago in the winter.
Wow.
And it was a dark time for me.
Wow.
And I followed an ad that I saw in the free newspaper, feeling stressed, learn to meditate. And right on the next street was a Korean Zen Buddhist temple of compassionate wisdom. And I took that meditation class and I haven't looked back.
And it was on the next street from where you had been
Where I
living?
was living, where I
Oh,
lived during my
wow.
graduate school. Yeah,
Wow. Wow. And
yeah.
so you
So,
went and
so I
yeah.
started meditating, and I felt remarkably different in how I was approaching my life. My circumstances didn't change,
Yeah.
but how I was in relationship to my life changed quite a lot. And then fast forward, after my PhD, I did a postdoc in behavioral medicine and psycho-oncology, and then my first full-time faculty position was at the UMass Medical School Medical Center. And I had joint appointment in nursing and preventive and behavioral medicine. And the Center for Mindfulness is there.
Wow.
And John Kabat-Zinn was still there. And that was in 98 rather. And 99, I finished the MBSR teacher training, clinical practicum, the first one. And from there, I started bringing my personal meditation practice into my role as a researcher.
Mhm.
And Ilana Rosenbaum, who you might
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
Ilana had personally lived through a bone marrow transplant, stem cell transplant, and she was there as a teacher, and we came together and also with John and started doing research while we were at UMass on the stem cell transplant patients. And then a few years later, I went to Dana-Farber, and I was there for 6 years and started doing research at Dana-Farber and Brigham on the bone
Wow.
marrow transplant
And
unit.
really bringing this kind of psychological, spiritual aspects to your work and seeing differences in the patients. Yeah.
Yeah, and it was mindfulness specific at that point. Yeah, we did. I
Yes.
did some
Yes.
other I did some other studies as well with expressive writing, music therapy, and then to just bridge, you said, okay, I'm now with Mind and Life.
Yes.
So
Yes.
I went to Emory University and then University of Virginia and then Mind and Life for 8 years, and I left there December of 2023. So how did that happen? Well, Mind and Life has an annual summer research institute. It's held at the Garrison Institute. And I attended my first one in 2007. And it's where there's this coming together of people who are interested at this intersection of scholarly inquiry and contemplative practice. And when I had that experience at SRI, I was like, I am hooked. Like I felt like I was finding a beautiful academic home where I could be myself and practice meditation, but also engage in really great exchange with different disciplines. So I got very involved with Mind and Life. I was served on various committees, as many, reviewed grants and a lot of different ways I served the organization. And then in 2015, they were looking for a new president. I was not looking for a new position. I was very happy at the University of Virginia. And with some encouragement, I accepted the position. And I'll tell you, my intention and why I accepted it and really stepped out of academia and being a researcher that time was hoping to have a greater global impact. Mind and Life as a global organization, number one. And I also was really interested in the intersection of contemplation, science, and action. And it's not just for the ivory tower and just for writing research articles, but I'm really interested in translating it, into the real world, into clinical care and society. So that was why I did it. So I can share a couple quick insights. I realize I've been talking
Yes, yeah,
quite a
no,
bit, but that's what
I
you
would love that.
asked.
And I also want to say too, I just think, you know, seeing where things were in the 80s with the acceptance of some of these non-traditional modalities and now really complementary, and then finding yourself in a whole environment that is embracing, studying, accepting. But
Yeah,
I would love to hear a couple of insights. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So contemplative science is a field now, in large part because of Mind and Life's work and the grants that Mind and Life gave over the years. But two key physical findings that you've probably heard, and I know Dave Vago was on recently, relates to neuroplasticity and also epigenetics. So our bodies are changing all the time, and the way we think and the way we exercise our minds influences our bodies in profound ways.
Yeah.
So that was something that we learned many, many, many times over and in many ways. And then the other is just relates to compassion. So I've had the opportunity of spending a lot of time with the Dalai Lama. And he just exudes compassion. His presence is warm. His hands are always warm. He's kind to everybody. And I've been following the news with Pope Francis, and I think that there's such similarities I keep thinking similarities between His Holiness and Pope Francis. They're
Yeah.
just they're just present. They're aware to the compassion, to the suffering that's around, and they lean into it.
Yeah.
And so to me, how we can be compassionate with ourselves
Mhm.
and aware of our compassion then helps us to also see the compassion in others. And then that's the next step, is to then do something about it, to alleviate it. And boy, we need it now more than ever, because there's a lot of suffering that's happening in our communities and all over the world.
I'm thinking about this trajectory between your first book, Leaves Falling Gently, and your more recent book about the climate crisis. And it seems like there is some resonance here from working with individuals who are facing serious illness and working with a planet that is facing a serious illness. I'm wondering, was that part of why you became interested in tracking that narrative, or was it just two different interests that you had?
Well, A Future We Can Love came directly from my work with Mind and Life. But I will also say that part of my leadership with Mind and Life is that I prioritized climate, environmental well-being and our connection with nature, that it doesn't stop at human flourishing, but we all need to flourish if we're going to flourish. So that was part of my strategy in leading Mind and Life, was to incorporate that. That led us to host a major event with the Dalai Lama and Greta Thunberg. And it was right after the 2016 election, so it was January of 2017. Anyway, I'm losing track of the dates, but it was no, it was actually 2020, and it was after the insurrection. And we had 1 million people join. 3 days later, 1 million people joined our call live. And then from there was interest in there being a book that was developed. So that's kind of how that came about.
John, I'm glad you brought that up. A Future We Can Love, I found so incredibly impactful. I loved it, Susan. And just continuing to weave how your work at Mind and Life that inspired this book, and the health of the planet is very much matter. Our health and the health of the planet are intertwined. Yeah.
Susan, if I can, your first book, Leaves Falling Gently, is going to be reissued with I think maybe revisions, maybe expanded material. I'm curious, were there things that you learned in the past 14, 15 years that you're like, I want to get that in there? I think there's
Absolutely.
something, yeah.
Yeah, well, there's 3 sections of the book: mindfulness, compassion, and connectedness. And the connectedness section I expanded. Now I have nature connection is included there. And then the other thing is that the first book did include some pointing to end of life. The new one doesn't. It's much more about just living with illness. And the other thing is that the new book is also a guide for patients and loved ones. And so there are every chapter has call out information to support loved ones and to help them.
Beautiful.
Well,
Beautiful.
Yeah, great. Really looking forward to it.
Well, this time always goes so quickly.
yes, it does.
Is there anything you'd like to close out with in terms of questions for Susan?
I was just going to say, Susan, is there anything that I should have asked you that I didn't, or, is there anything you want to say that just didn't come up?
No, there isn't, but I will end with something though.
Okay.
And I love to come back to, and it's a quote that Matthew Ricard shared with me in conversation. it's also the beginning of, I think, chapter one of my book. But I want us to just come back to, it relates to mindfulness, and that essentially all of us want a good quality of life, no matter who we are. How we define that is different, okay? But if we look at our lives from the moment we're born until the moment we die, right, it's just made up of moments. So the quality of our experience, moment by moment, will determine the quality of our lives.
Beautiful way to end. Yeah.